Marky, the cameras are rolling.
Oh, rolling. Got it. Hello, my name is Marky Harrison, and you are listening to the Flatbill Pastor Podcast, and I'm sitting here with, who are you again?
Clinton James Nolder.
All right, we're giving government names today. Clinton James Nolder.
That's it.
We're here on episode 3.
Episode 3.
So, you guys haven't canceled us again.
Mm-hmm.
So we have talked about some pretty heavy topics.
Yeah.
And I think we're staying on that trend today.
We are.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first, the chances of us getting canceled was high after the last one. I mean, we pretty much jumped into the breadbasket, into the kitchen of people who follow Jesus and specifically attend church regularly. And just basically, we're all up in their preferences.
Mm-hmm.
And, no one picketed or rioted outside of our facility that I know of, Still time.
Yeah. They're just here. Nobody's here.
That's right. I mean, you never know. I don't know. So, but this time, we're going to talk about when I saw, what the topic was that we needed to chat about. It's a question that is asked by almost everyone in any stage of faith or lack of faith. So whether they've been a follower of Jesus for decades or whether they're antagonistic towards faith, this is a common ground question that I get asked a lot.
Right.
And it's a really difficult question to ask. So should I say the question or you saying the question?
I mean, now you have to say it.
Okay. The question is this. In fact, people that are listening probably already are guessing. Hey, I know what the question is.
I wonder what they're guessing.
I don't know. Throw it in the comments before we say it. We're going to say it in like 3 seconds. Oh, why do bad things happen to good people? Yeah.
I have asked that question to myself and out loud before.
Same. I actually asked this question to God just a few weeks ago. And, it's one that I continue to wrestle with. I've been doing church work for almost 20 years now. I started in 2005. And even though I have an answer, it's definitely not an answer that I love day in and day out.
Yeah. I think it's even if you know intellectually how to answer this question, it's something that you're going to wrestle with for the duration of your life. I think it's something that you have to continually remind yourself of and sort of educate yourself and educate your heart and inform your heart that there are some truthful answers to this question. And it's just, I think, something that everybody can relate to, and everyone's tried to answer this question for themselves.
Right.
And
here's the difficult thing is as we start to discuss it, a lot of times what we want in terms of answers to really difficult questions is we want an answer that's going to make us feel better about the question.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's a number of things in our world, in our community, in our lives where the answer doesn't make us feel better. It doesn't mean that the answer is invalid or not truthful. It just is what it is. Feelings can be deceptive sometimes in terms of whether or not it's the right thing, even though it might not feel like the right thing. It might not change that it is the right thing,
Right. So just to kind of frame up the question, like we're putting ourselves in the mindset of, if we have a loving God, if we have a loving God who cares about his creation, cares about us individually as people, then why would bad things happen to good people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's making the question even more specific. If we have a loving God, because for sure, the God of the Bible declares that he is love, right? Not just that he is loving, but he's the definition of love. And so it's an easy jump then to say, well, if this God, when I say this God declares, hey, I am love in and of itself, then how could anything that comes in and around me or even might be perceived as coming from me, how could anything not be loving? And I think one of the first questions that we've got to ask as we really, if we really want to boil down and or tighten down on the answer is let's define before we get to the God part, let's define bad, you
Okay.
know? So why do bad things happen to good people? What qualifies as bad?
I mean, I think everyone agree bad things are things like violence,
Okay, yeah.
things like death and sickness.
Yeah.
I mean, that's bad,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. So we're thinking through like abuse,
Yeah.
right? Cancer,
Mhm.
um, car accidents,
Mm.
when you're not at fault. Um, children that get sick and never recover. Um, yeah, definitely enormously bad things. The question though becomes how far do we want to go into bad being unacceptable? So I get like the extreme pieces, like, hey, we struggle with cancer, we struggle with the accidents, we struggle with the sicknesses and the undeserved violence, all those things, right? Um, but if we're gonna say, hey, why do bad things happen to good people? What amount of bad are we tolerant of? And I think that's we've got to establish that to make sure that we can answer this question fully. So let's take it to the smallest bad thing. So like I don't know, like I stubbed my toe, right?
So bad.
So that is bad. I mean, that's bad. I stubbed my toe. I broke a nail,
Mhm.
right? Like bad things.
So bad.
You know what I'm saying? Like those are bad things. Um, are we saying that hey, we don't even want those bad things to happen to good people? Like should good people be exempt from anything that's absolutely bad, or where's the line? That when once we cross this line, it's like, okay, you don't deserve that anymore. But the other bad things, the smaller bad things, are just the normal way of life.
Mhm.
And then what becomes where is it on the scale where we put the line in the sand that says once we cross this line, this is no longer something that we want to tolerate or be acceptable in terms of bad things that can happen to these good people, you know? And
Right.
typically when I have this discussion, it's a difficult line to draw. It's like, okay, well, bad is bad, And honestly, good people probably don't even deserve to stub their toe.
Right, that's kinda where my mind is going, like, in my mind, if we're defining bad, like, nobody ever wants to stub their toe.
Right.
Like, nobody ever wants to get a cold, nobody ever wants, to be cut off in traffic, like, nobody wants that, so, like, my mind goes straight to, why would any of it exist?
Right. So then we've got to ask the question. So if it is everything, if there's no line to draw in the sand, that is just hey, if you're a good person, there is no bad that should happen to you. Well, then we've got to say, well, how do we accomplish that? If we really want to see that through, if we really want to live in a world where if you're a good person, nothing bad happens to you. Well, if we're talking stubbed toes and broken nails on the simplest forms of that, well, then what do I do? Do I put you in like an isolation chamber in a bubble and just make sure that you don't get out? But then that in and of itself is also a bad thing, right? So now I don't have freedom. And so we've exchanged one thing to protect me from another, right? We just said, hey, well, I'm willing to take on this bad piece or isolation. Well, maybe it's not isolation. I still want my freedom. Well, then some bad things that happen to good people happen because there's bad people, right? So when we say, hey, good people, in order for there to be good people, there's also got to be a way that we measure that. So there's got to be bad people, right? How else would we know they were good unless we knew what bad was? And so if we're saying that because sometimes, the drunk driver crosses the line and hits you head on and you did nothing, right? Like that's what happens in our world. And so we then want to say, hey, well, in order to make sure that doesn't happen, let's take all of the bad people that make terrible decisions and let's get rid of them then. And then all the good people can just live in a world all by themselves and they won't hurt each other, Well, then we've got to ask the question, okay, well, who's on the list? Who are we getting rid of?
I mean, you could think about it that way. I mean, bad people, I think we can all agree, there's obvious candidates like Hitler.
Yeah.
He's a bad guy.
Bad guy. Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes the bad guys are the people making mistakes, like getting behind the wheel when they're under the influence.
Sure.
And I mean, fill in the blank. There's bad people. I mean, you could call you could call the kid who put the Lego out on the floor a bad person.
So bad, actually. Yeah.
So bad.
Uh-huh.
You better put that away. Break our toes.
Uh-huh.
Um, but my mind also goes to how is that our responsibility? We did not create this bad. So why would it be up to us to think of a solution? Aren't there supposed to be higher powers to do that for us? Like the whole question is like if we have a higher power, why would this be their way?
Right. So, again, though, that's the first there's a bunch of questions we gotta answer, but the first question is, how bad is too bad that we're willing to like, is there a tolerance level? And if we're saying, "No, no bad should exist," well, then that means we've then gotta ask the question, well, what about people who make bad decisions? Do we isolate them? Or are we saying that we wanna make sure that people can't even make bad decisions? Like, we're not even gonna allow someone to have the freedom to go out for drinks, make a terrible decision, and get behind the wheel of a car and drive home. And we're going to make it impossible for that to happen. So then we're going to go to the extreme of, let's ban alcohol. That way, none of those things can ever happen. Let's ban firearms because nothing can ever. Let's ban knives. Let's take it to whatever degree to where whatever someone could use to harm someone else, let's take everything away, and then we will have solved the people make bad decisions issue. That's the way we can handle it. Or we can ask God to do it and say, well, hey, just take the willingness or the ability or even the thought out of all of our minds to do bad things, right?
Right.
So can you just cleanse us all, right? Is there a way for you to make us all right? Right? That's what we're asking.
Yes.
I love that question because his response is, I got you. You
Okay.
know, 100% I can do that. And he's in the process of doing that.
Mm.
I mean, that's the whole gospel of Jesus is I want to make every one of you right. Um, I want to give you a new world and a new way of living for the rest of eternity where bad things no longer happen to people who have been made good. And so when we look at the Bible, that's what he's attempting to do. But honestly, it's one of those things where like, okay, well, I don't even know if I can believe in this thing you're trying to do for us, God, because if you can't do it here and now, I don't know if I want to wait for later. And if you
Right.
can't do it here and now, I don't believe you will do it later,
Mhm.
you know? Um, it's a really difficult question. It's the first question has to be, hey, is there a sliding scale of bad? If there's not a sliding scale of bad of tolerance where we can have a few bad things happen to good people, just we don't want to cross this line. Or if it's no, we want to get rid of all bad in the world, then how do we do that? And how would God do that? If he were to just to snap his fingers, that's one big question. The other question, though, is not only is can we define bad and what we want to happen, the other question is, can we even define good? Like, what does it mean to be a good person? Does good mean innocent? You
Mhm.
know? Is that how we define good people? Like, they were driving in their own lane and someone came into their lane, and so they were innocent and that makes them good? Um, or is it like, how do we judge who is good and who's not good? And does that mean that people are not allowed to make any mistakes? And then that disqualifies them as good? Like, what do you have to do or what do you have to not do in order to be assumed or qualify for nothing bad should happen to me, you know?
I mean, good people don't do the bad things. I think a lot of the definition of good is the absence of bad.
Sure.
Um,
Okay.
but it's not just that, it's the presence of, you know, love and care and patience and um gentleness, I think the absence of bad would just be really bland and nothing.
I
So
agree.
having something in its place is necessary to define good. Um
So good is active.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Good is, I mean, in that scenario of talking about somebody just minding their business and, you know, they're following the rules that prevent chaos, I think is part of being a good person in society. Thinking of others is good. Um, Serving others is good,
Sure.
you know?
So where do we get the definition though? Like, how? What is our measuring? How do we measure good? You know, like how many times do we have to think of someone else to be good? And are we saying that someone who's bad never thought it? Is that what we're saying, that someone who's bad, who maybe deserves something, they deserve a consequence, they deserve for the world not to go their way? How many times do they have? Would they have to do good to then become or qualify as a good person? You know?
Right. I mean, most people, at least in my opinion, would probably think, well, good should outweigh the bad.
Okay.
So as long as there's more good than bad,
So,
that would.
and so then we gotta ask, well, who's counting? Who's keeping track? Are we following people around? Is it possible that there is a lot of good that's done by people that's done in secret because they don't want the credit and they're not interested in everyone knowing about their generosity or their willingness to serve someone else? And do those things count? And do we get to be the judge of, you know, someone's goodness?
I think it's pretty obvious if somebody is bad because it's affecting everyone else in a way that it's so obvious. Like if somebody passes the judgment pretty quickly that you're a bad guy, you're a bad, you know, you're a bad person, I think that's glaringly obvious. So I think the same goes for good. Like if somebody can meet you and within the first few minutes or they've known you for 20 years and they can vouch for you that you're a good person, I think for the most part it's an obvious definition. And now if humanity is actually the one creating a solution, I agree that there should be better measurables in defining that, because if it truly is a problem that we're dealing with, then it should be that way. But I think we've all kind of thought this through and it seems pretty helpless as far as us fixing that problem.
Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, I don't see how we could go this many years into humanity and had not figured out a solution by now if we really truly thought it was our problem.
So then we think it's God's problem.
Exactly. That's the whole basis of the question is we've got a problem and we figured out that we can't fix it. Like we've come this far and it we can't fix it. I mean, people have tried so many things. People have tried spreading good. People have tried eliminating the bad people, or at least by their measurable, by their definition bad. And it's not working.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think we've defined we've decided that it's beyond us.
Yeah, I think when someone asks the question, um, for me as a pastor, and when someone comes and typically, they ask the question in the middle of heartbreak or desperation, um, that they ask the question in the middle of some anger and something has happened, they've lost someone or they just got a diagnosis or something has happened that's fairly tragic. And then they ask the question, "Hey, why? Explain this to me. I'm so angry at God. Um, why is this happening to me? Why did this happen to him? Why did this happen to her? She's such a good person." We see people all over the world that are terrible people, yet they're flourishing. They have all the money they want, all the toys they want, all the things they want. You know, they seem to be living the best life, and then some of the best people are suffering and going through problems, and that's typically the life circumstance that this question gets asked. When I hear the question, though, and it goes along with exactly what you just said, for me, it gives me a ton of hope because the person is realizing, "Hey, I know there's a God who can do something about this. Why doesn't he?" And while it's framed in the way of, "I'm disappointed in God," there is still hope even in the question. Because
Yeah.
it acknowledges, I just feel like something should be done about it. And I feel like if just like you said, if we could do something about it, we would have done it. But we know that we can't because we've exhausted all of our options. And each and every day we wake up and we continue to exhaust all of our options. But there is a God, or we feel like there's this higher power. We feel like there's someone sitting up there or sitting out there somewhere who has the ability to have influence on those things. And so we're asking the question, we're banging our fist up against the table, we're screaming at the top of our lungs, we're crying our eyes out, and just desperately asking, "Hey, I know you have an answer. Why do you let this happen?" And unfortunately, the answer on the other end isn't an answer that we want to hear. When we take a look at the way humanity is and we ask the question, "All right, God, can you explain to us what's happening and why it's happening?" I mean, the explanation is this, in the beginning, God created humanity to have a relationship with humanity,
Mhm.
and that was the desire. And then humanity chose to allow something into that relationship that wasn't there. Humanity chose to allow evil in. Now, we can then go back and say, well, why was evil even an option? Why was that even on the table as something for humanity to choose?
Right.
Well, I think that goes back to the authentic self he wants us to be. He doesn't want God's not interested in relationships with puppets on strings. He's not interested in having a relationship with a puppy that stays in a cage where the puppy can never get out and like be what it's supposed to be. It can never chew on things. It can never make a mess anywhere. It just sits in the cage. God wasn't interested in just having a humanity in a cage that's fully protected, that could never run in the road, that can never get into trouble, that can never, go to the bathroom in the floor before they get let out, that never chew on someone's shoes that were expensive and they shouldn't have. Like he didn't want that. He wanted creation to interact in a way where it was a real, genuine relationship, which meant that there had to be options on the table not to always do everything he wanted us to do. And that's the beauty of humanity. And it's also the downfall of humanity that we can choose to do whatever we want to. Um, and there are consequences to our choices. And the way that humanity works, because of the way he designed us, unfortunately, there are consequences about my choices that will impact you, even though you had nothing to do with my choices. Because humanity is a communal creation. Like we
And I
all are
love that
intertwined.
about humanity, but the question that comes to my mind then is why, if this is so important, why, if understanding God and understanding that he's loving and understanding and all of humanity can recognize good and bad in their own way, right? Like everybody can look around the world and wherever you live, like there's definitions of good and bad.
Sure.
Why is it so hard then for us to why is it so different then from the way that God has chosen to deal with the problem? Why if we have thought of things, why is it that our definitions are so different from God's? Why Do you understand, like, where I'm going with this? Like, it feels like we're, like, on completely different wavelengths if we're racking our brains and the best solutions humanity has come up with don't work. Like, why is it so different? If we truly are trying to answer this question and we've come to the point where even we believe that it's something that we can't solve, why is it so different? God's plan to deal with evil, deal with bad. Why is it so different than ours?
Well, I think while I think oftentimes the way we as people approach problems, we approach it situationally. And so we're saying, "Hey, um, what we don't want is what we don't want is someone taking a firearm and shooting up a school." And so then we start to solve that problem. Okay, how can we make sure that schools don't get shot up, right? And we wanna solve that problem.
Mhm.
Or we say, "Hey, we don't want, intoxicated people driving cars." And so now we're gonna solve that problem, right? And so
Right.
we got laws, we got these expectations, we're gonna do this ad campaign, we're gonna create things for bartenders and restaurants and create some responsibility, all those things. We're gonna do checkpoints. Um, we're gonna have whatever the problem is, we're gonna take it situationally and logically, we're gonna work through problem and solution, taking in all of the data and say, "Hey, we're gonna work the problem until we come up with a solution." And that's the way we approach things. God, on the other hand, isn't thinking in terms of situations one at a time and how each one of them can be addressed. God is looking deeper at the root cause of every single one of these situations. And so, if when we talk about school shootings, or we talk about drunk driving, or we talk about any other act of violence, abuse, all those things, all of them come back to a very central cause, that at the end of the day, there's evil present in the world. And so God is working the evil problem, not necessarily working the symptoms of evil's problem, right? And so we want the symptoms of a fallen world or a broken world, or we want the symptoms of evil to disappear. God wants evil to disappear, right?
Yeah.
And so he's working a completely different set of things. And we don't even understand, like, where would we even begin as a people to say, okay, great, let's eradicate evil? I don't even know if we can point our finger to it, but we for sure can point our finger to the symptoms of it. We can point our finger at violence, and we can point our finger at abuse, and we can point our finger at all those things, even down to sickness, right?
Mhm.
I mean, when we look at a broken, fallen world, we go from God created perfection, and perfection was something that was tangible, and then uh, evil came in and took perfection and started making it crumble and said, "Hey, you're not going to be as perfect." And the longer it goes, when we look at cancer and the breakdown of our own bodies, the Bible tells us that even creation groans for redemption, that even the world is affected by evil. The dirt on the ground, the flowers we see, the sky, all of creation is affected because evil is a part of what we're doing day in and day out. And so it's not just that evil affects us, evil affects all of creation. And so as evil breaks down what has been from the very beginning good, God goes to the root cause of that while we stick on the surface level and try to figure out the symptoms. And so I think that's why it feels like we're on two completely different things. And that is why God's solution doesn't sit well with us, because God's solution is much more long game than the short game that we want to play in terms of symptoms.
Mhm.
We want school shootings to stop now, which is great. And God says, you know what? I want school shootings to stop now also, but I also want abuse to stop worldwide. And I also want people who are devalued or undervalued or told they're worthless. I want women who are in countries that are still seen as second class citizens. I want them to be seen as children of God. I want that to be taken seriously, just like school shootings. I want cancer to be done. I want the sicknesses to be done. I want abuse and child abuse and the neglect. I want the porn industry to be done. I want sexual slavery to be done. Like, I've got a huge list of all these things. And how do I address all of them at the same time? Because the truth is, there's 8 billion people in the world. And each one of us are asking the question, why do good things happen to bad people? Or excuse me, why do bad things happen to good people? And the bad thing we're talking about is a different symptom of evil. And so there's 8 billion different things. It's an exaggeration, but there's billions of different bad things that are happening. And we want situational awareness about all of them. And we want God to address every single one of them. And that God, though, is looking at us and saying, I'm trying to address every single bad thing that's happening. But we don't see that. We're just saying, hey, I just want you to solve the freaking cancer thing. But then my neighbor across the street is saying, no, I want you to solve the school shooting thing. And God is saying, yes, I'm solving all of them, but I'm solving them through Jesus. And then when we hear that he's solving all of these issues through Jesus, we're like, no, no, I that's not short game enough for us, right? I want it done now. You know, if you're really God, why can't you snap your fingers? And his response to why he can't snap his fingers is, how do you do that? You neuter everyone. You take away the legitimate relationship that is possible between creation and creator if he were to snap his fingers and rid us of evil. And he doesn't want that. He wants us to choose goodness. He wants to choose him. He wants to choose Jesus. He wants us to have a perspective that goes beyond the temporary situations that we have in this world. He wants us to begin to realize that life is important, but eternal life is equally as important. That yes, this life that we have here, it's valuable. We only get one of them. We're only
Mhm.
getting one shot at this. But the truth is there is an eternal life with our souls that is equally as important as this momentary interaction that you or I are having right here in the flesh, right? But there's an eternal life that's still coming. Now, whether we want to acknowledge that or not, um, that's up to us. But he wants us to have the choice. He doesn't want to force us into understanding eternity matters.
And I understand that. I love choice. Like I love that about humanity that we choose everything about our lives and we get to see the natural outcomes of that and the manufactured outcomes of that. But what I can't understand is why the choice for good is so difficult. Why is evil so powerful? Like why is it so hard to see the good in the world when there is bad? Like I understand the whole like there is no good news without bad news. Like I get it. But if good is as good as it says that it is, why is it so hard?
You know, I don't know if it is as difficult as it feels sometimes. I think that the bad pieces just simply are louder voices. There's a lot of really good things that are happening in the world. And I mean, even, and we see this goodness because it's even more prevalent when you find someone, especially someone we would say, man, you're a really great guy, you're a really great girl, and something devastating happens to them.
Mhm.
And we see the goodness come to the forefront in the midst of the tragedy, in the midst of the diagnosis, in their own attitude and approach to God. You know, I'm thinking of a woman in our church right now who is just beating the snot out of breast cancer, you know,
Mm.
and she is just fighting nonstop.
Yeah.
And when you talk to her and you hear her attitude in the midst of this, I mean, she's had moments where it's like, man, this is really difficult. But when you speak with her, you see that the goodness in her is stronger than the bad things that are happening to her. And so while you can't stop bad, goodness still is winning, you know?
Mm.
Like bad's got some momentum, but the goodness is still winning. And the influence that she has through her attitude and her words and her demeanor and her approach to faith and her approach to God in the midst of this difficult fight that is happening to someone who does not deserve it is inspiring to other people. And that continues to encourage the goodness that happens, whether there's a bad situation or not. You know, it- but bad is such a squeaky wheel. evil is such a squeaky wheel. It impacts us so much, um, that it's hard to ignore it. It's hard to go a day without it. Whereas there's a lot of good that happens behind closed doors, and people through humility, which is also an incredible trait, would prefer people not be aware of some of that goodness. Um, and so it doesn't get all the publicity that every single little bad thing does. And I think bad sells, you know, in our culture and our humanity, as much as we don't want bad things to happen to good people, when bad things happen, we watch it and we listen to it and we read about it and we retweet it and we search for it on the internet and we look at the videos and we are glued to it. There's something about watching someone else go through tragedy and suffering that we want all the juicy details and the gossip.
I think part of that though is kind of like an unspoken like social understanding, like an unspoken social contract, so to speak. Like we talk about, you know, what some people would define as gossip or what some people would define as like just being morbid, like like intentionally educating yourself or informing yourself or consuming, you know, what we would consider bad things. I think it's more like, okay, when when we both understand what is bad and we can talk about that out loud, it kind of creates this unspoken contract of like that's wrong and that shouldn't happen and we should not let that happen between us, but also we should be against that in general. So, I mean, I think it's more of a coping mechanism
Okay.
than anything else. I mean, of course, there are exceptions to that rule, and you have people who are out there, you know, indulging in that. But for the most part, I think listening to true crime podcasts and watching the Jeffrey Dahmer documentary and, you know, watching the news for that matter, it's more about just re reinforcing that this shouldn't be happening.
I think it reinforces it. I think it's also entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of alien to most of us. I mean,
Sure.
it's something different and mysterious to us, and so if we can put something tangible to that, it's always going to be intriguing. Um, Although it may like haunt our thoughts, like it's still something that we find interesting to some degree.
Yeah.
It's always got an air of mystery, but I mean, again, like, I feel like it's a coping mechanism to have that. I mean, it's gonna be there anyway,
Sure.
so why wouldn't we be on the same page about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can watch it. I think we can indulge in it. I think we could pursue it and follow it and search for it. And it could be used as a coping mechanism for sure. But I think it also has the potential, we have a school shooting and all of a sudden we search the name because we want to know more about them and then it just elevates the person. I think it can be a coping mechanism as well as elevating a symptom to a place that maybe doesn't need as much notoriety. But then you also have the issue of, well, then how do you raise awareness? How do you get on the same page if you're not all on the same page? If there's always not an awareness? I think it's a sticky slope, it's a sticky slope, a sticky situation, a slippery slope, one that um one that has unintended consequences, no matter which way you turn or which way you go, you know?
Right.
And at the end of the day, though, I don't think it makes anyone feel better about bad things happening to good people. And and again, I think those are the big questions we've been talking about help us understand, asking questions like, well, how bad is too bad for someone to experience? Or is it just all bad is bad? So let's just whitewash the whole world. Let's just make it perfectly clean, no spots, no dirt, nothing, just spotless? And is that what we're really chasing down? Um, then we're asking the question, well, how do you even define good people? Like, who deserves to not have that anything bad happen to them? And what's the excuse me, and then what's the line that they would cross, or not cross in order to have that? And then we have the question, well, is there really a God who can do anything about it because we've exhausted all of our, all of our options on our own? And I think what we find is that it all leads us back to the same place, which from a biblical perspective has an explanation. The reason bad things happen to good people is because evil exists. Evil's real.
Yeah.
And there are consequences to evil, both consequences that are earned by bad decisions that we make, and also consequences that come because there is debris that spreads because of the communal nature of creation, from my bad decision onto other people. And so other people suffer oftentimes because of mistakes that I make,
Mhm.
which, you know, all of this, the question in and of itself points to a creator. Most people want it to point to a lack of God or an absence of God, but God actually has a solution for evil. And when we really jump into this question, we find that, yeah, while it frustrates us that God hasn't done something, it also has the potential to ignite our faith, knowing that because He hasn't done something in our brains, in our minds, it gives us the opportunity to explore, if you were going to do something, what would you do? And then God responds by saying, I'm already doing it. I've already started. I sent Jesus as the catalyst, as the beginning, as the inauguration of a kingdom that's coming where bad things no longer happen to people who have been made good. And that for sure there is a line in the sand, and the line in the sand is for God is zero bad, no bad. The Bible tells us that in the new heaven and new earth there will be no tears, right? So it's zero bad. He said, I've got an answer for you. And my answer starts with Jesus. And the reason Jesus is necessary to have a solution for this is because evil is legitimately real. And because evil is real, there are consequences both for me and for other people that are associated or just within splash range of the decisions that I make. And that creation as a whole groans for redemption because not just the humanity piece of creation, but all of creation is affected by evil. And so he says, and Jesus is the solution for all of that. So Jesus just begins it. And what the only tension that it creates in terms of the biblical narrative is, why can't it happen faster? Why can't we snap our fingers? And God's response to that is, I'm not going to snap my fingers because the way I created you is not to be caged animals. I love you too much to put you in a cage and put you in a box or put you in a padded room so you are completely safe. Because he already knows that for us to live in a cage is worse than a bad thing happening to a good person. I promise, if you ask the woman in our church who is dealing with cancer, if she had to choose to be put in a cage where she could have no contamination and nothing else could happen to her from birth all the way through life, if she had to trade in everything so that she could avoid the diagnosis, she would say, absolutely not. No, that the bad thing is bad, but it's not worth trading in all of the goodness that I've experienced as a creation of God. And that is taking the good with the bad, that our good days become that much better because we've experienced bad days.
So what I'm understanding is that there can't be good if there's an ounce of bad. Like, it's not good anymore. Like, it's not good in its fullness.
Go a little further, say it again. There can't be good.
So you're explaining that, like, on the other side of heaven, like, the other side of this life, like, there's only goodness. There's not any bad, 0 bad. So if, say, we could accomplish that, God could snap his fingers and there's no longer any bad here, like, I mean, to me, if that's our definition, like, there's only good when there's complete absence of bad, then, like, in its truest form, then is heaven not kinda like a cage? Like, are we not, like, is the best part of our humanity then stripped? Because if we're talking about us having such a communal, life as humans and we get choice as humans, like, does that even exist anymore?
I don't see any evidence that choice disappears because when we look at creation in the very beginning, even though creation was perfection, choice still existed. Now, that then gets us into a completely different theological argument of, let's go back to the original creation narrative and Adam and Eve in this garden of perfection, and there's this tree of knowledge of good and evil that they're told, hey, you can do anything you want, just don't eat of this tree. This is their one choice. And then they decide, well, screw it, let's go for it. You know what? Maybe I think God's holding out on us. And they decide, hey, we're not going to trust God fully. Is there going to be an opportunity like that moving forward? That's a really great question. You know, I don't know if I can answer that at this moment. My gut tells me that all evil pays a penalty and that evil will be paying that penalty and there will be no exceptions to that. And that the knowledge of the legitimacy of heaven and hell, of presence with God and absence of God will be enough for us to understand the difference in those choices. And while in original creation there wasn't the knowledge of good and evil, in the new heaven and new earth, there will be the knowledge of good and evil and the knowledge that we chose good. And
Yeah.
that will, from what I understand, will be enough for us to be not only content, but completely satisfied in the very presence of God. You know, um, relationship with God is all he's after. And he doesn't want anything to interfere with that relationship. And right now there's a lot of things interfering with it.
Yes.
And so Jesus inaugurates the kingdom of God coming. It begins the process of the new heaven, the new earth. It begins the process of complete redemption of our really negative or poor choices, as well as the choices that were made by other people that have negative side effects on us, you know?
I mean, it makes sense for like, I hadn't really thought about, you know, like, there was choice in the beginning of creation, and but there wasn't any bad until the wrong choice was made. I mean, I guess you could call it a choice, not necessarily the wrong choice. Most humanity would say that it was the wrong choice, but I mean, we don't have that same circumstance. We only know that there's bad and good.
Sure.
So we'll never understand what it's like until we're on the other side of heaven to know what it's like to not have bad. So I think the choice, like you said, is a little bit different for us because we understand evil. Like we understand what it looks like. We understand that the knowledge of both good and evil, we're going to choose good most of the time. I mean, I think
Yeah.
most of us don't like the bad things. We don't like evil.
Yeah, I think the presence of Jesus and the reality of the cross for Jesus and him physically in our presence will be an incredible reminder of evil, you know, of like, yeah, I'll never forget what he had to go through to get us here, you know.
Mm,
And unfortunately though, you know, what we want is we want God to snap his fingers and us to fast forward to there without all the unintended consequences, that would happen. The putting us in a cage, like, hey, can we just pretend like evil never happened? And God's got too much integrity, and He wants us to learn from that integrity. That He set a plan in motion, He gave us parameters, He has given us life, and He's going to make good on those promises for life. And through that creation and those promises that He's made, He is working His own will for a rescue plan, which includes Jesus. And so He's working through the integrity that He has and the promises that He has and including Jesus in that so that there is a rescue mission. And the church is an enormous part of that.
Mm.
The church, and this is why last week matters so much, and we talked about preferences, because there's such an urgency and a reality to the work that the church does on behalf of God, on behalf of Jesus in this rescue mission. That, hey, because this question, why do bad things happen to good people, is such a pressing issue that affects each and every one of us that circle this globe, because it's so real, we ought to have an answer. And the answer, and the good news is that nobody has an answer to the question that anyone's satisfied with.
Yeah.
But the only answer that makes absolute sense is that God is saying, I'm working on it, and I'm working on it through Jesus. And ultimately, there is an answer. It's just not going to happen right now, though it is starting to happen now. It is in process of me answering the question or putting it to rest. No more bad things will happen to good people who have been made good. And I've mentioned that a few times because at the end of the day, when God looks at us, because evil is the way it is, and because God is completely perfect, he sees all of us, whether whether we have 1 ounce of mistake in us or 100 ounces of mistake in us. He sees all of us as disqualified from perfection, right?
Right.
If perfection is completely pure, even the smallest drop of impurities makes it the whole batch impure. And so he doesn't look at us as you're mostly good, you're kind of good, you're almost good, you're really bad. He just looks at all of humanity as each one of you are by definition not perfect. And if you're not perfect, then you're flawed. Now, some of us are way more flawed than others, right? And enormously more flawed than others. Um, and who knows where we're at on that scale. But God doesn't look at the scale of things. He just sees separation. He sees separated from perfection or included in perfection. And he knows that I want to include as many people as want to be included in perfection and perfection. And I'm going to send Jesus. And through Jesus, I'm going to make even, even the decent people, which are still imperfect, through Jesus, he says, I'm going to make them good, really good, truly good, honestly good, perfectly good. And that's the answer is
Mm.
we don't get a here and now satisfy my internal desires and cravings and my, frustration, satisfy my frustration of bad things happening to good people now. He says, I'm on it. I'm coming for you. I already come for you, and I'm coming back for you. And you get to decide how true, how much does this question actually matter to you? How, when you ask the question, why do good things happen to bad people? How much does that question actually matter to you? And if it matters a lot to you, he's saying, I have an answer. It's just whether or not we want to accept his answer or not.
Mm.
And if it does matter to us a lot of times we can use a question just to voice frustration. And honestly, we don't care about the answer. We just want something else to yell out loud. But if it honestly bothers us, then he says, hey, I've got a solution. I have a solution. It's just not happening in this moment. It's just, it's not a now thing. It's a forever thing. And forever has already started. It is in process. And each and every day that God gives us breath, we inch closer and closer to the reality that, hey, there is a moment coming where no more bad things happen to people who have been made good. And they're made good through Jesus.
Yeah, and I think we like questions and answers to be acceptable. We love a good FAQ,
Yeah.
but I think the hardest questions about life and faith and love and God, we have to answer our whole lives. I think it's something that we can know in our head what the words are to answer the question, but knowing it in our heart is a completely different story, and it's a lifetime of answering and um, building that trust in the answer.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, again, if you are hearing this and you're thinking, well, I disagree with this answer. I need some clarity on this answer. I loved this answer. I just want to talk about it, you can uh, text the word podcast. You want to give us the number?
678-661-6330.
We would love to hear from you. Even if it's off topic, we'd love to hear from you. We want to hear what you want to talk about on the Flatbill Pastor podcast.
Yeah.
We hope that these conversations continue to bring you back to vulnerability and re-answering questions maybe you already answered, or they give you a little bit of confidence and clarity in answering questions that you haven't answered before. But overall, we hope that it allows you to, we hope it sparks discovery for yourself. And we'd love to be there for you if we can be and you want us to be. So,
yeah.
We want to thank you guys for listening in.
Thanks for listening to episode 3.
Episode 3. And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Toodles.
Toodles.